Hi everyone, my name is Toyo Bali. I'm a Microsoft MVP on data platform. Today I'll be talking about Azure Database for PostgreSQL, 15 essentials for compliance and security. If you are using Azure Database for PostgreSQL, doesn't matter if you're a veteran or if you're new, you should be listening to this talk. Okay, so let's dive into the 15 essentials that I just talking about. And I thank you all for joining. Hope you are enjoying the conference. And I also want to thank Claire from Microsoft who actually encouraged me to submit for this conference and help me with few tips about my abstract. And I also I'm thankful to Teresa, Isaac, and Mai for looking at my slides and checking this for accessibility. And if you have any questions, you can, if you're watching it live, you can always put in the chat. But if you're watching it later in the recording, I'm going to share my contacts. You can always reach out to me, and I guarantee you that I will answer your question, within a couple of working days. If you have any questions, comments, you can always put it here. I'm not going to talk about my credentials. Just take a note of my contacts, and I'll share those again at the end of the session. So let's dive in. So what we will be talking about today? We'll be talking about 15 standards, as you probably read in the abstract, and I'll try to make a case for each one that why you should be thinking about those standards on particular topic out of those 15. And I'll also give you an example of what standard I implemented, but that is heavily influenced by my workplace because I work for a financial industry. So I have certain requirements. If you're working for a different industry, you might not follow exactly the standards that I'm implementing, and that's absolutely fine. You should be talking to your application owners, you should understand your business, and you should modify the standards that I'm going to tell you. And I'm also going to tell you how I implemented the standards, right? And I'll be talking primarily about two ways to implement those standards, and we'll go into a little bit more details on those. Um, at the end of this session, I'll also give you a checklist that you should be able to download from my GitHub repo, which I'll share the link at the end. That will summarize the whole talk and kind of give you a checklist that you can take with you at your work, and you can go through the checklist each item by item and cross those off and implement those. When it comes to implementation of these 15 standards that we'll be talking about, so there will be few that you should be implementing during when you are im- when you are deploying your resources, like when you are setting up your PostgreSQL, uh, whether you do it through template, whether you do it through pipeline, whatever way you do it, doesn't matter. You should check those right at that time. But after you do those, right, then you can still check most of this stuff. So the way I do it is mostly Azure policy, and other one is Azure function. Azure policy is the best thing to do if you can, because you can set it up at a higher level, like at a tenant level or at a subscription level, and it will check all your resources underneath. But there will be situations, right, that you cannot really do it with the from a higher level, because if you have a lot of flexibility with your standard, right, if you give the app owners flexibility, say like long-term backup retention, someone need 10 years, someone need 5 years, someone need 3 years, it will be very difficult to implement this via Azure policy, because now you have to put the policy at a very lower at a granular level, right? That's really not the way policy work. So in those cases, if you see that I put both options in the slide, uh, you should probably look at a Azure function driven by a table, right? So if you have a table driven, if you have a table that has all the metadata, that okay, this one I need 5 year, this one I need 3 year, this one I need 10 year or whatever, and the function can go and read those and check against those, right? And if someone changed it, and so you get an alert, you get a notification, you go and double check and fix it. Either you update your table or you reset it where it was, where your standard should be. And before I go further, other thing is for every all the 15 standards, you will see primarily 3 slides. The first slide we will be talking about why should you have a standard, what is the requirement, uh, what's driving to set up a standard across the board. And the second slide we will talk about what I implemented based on my experience and my work I just told you. And if there are any exceptions, how do we deal with it? How do we check the standard, right? How do we implement it? And you'll see a third slide, which I'll mostly skip because that will have to learn more, right? If you want to read more about that particular standard, if you want to read more about the implementation, I put some links, mostly from Learn website that's maintained by Microsoft. So every third slide for each standard, I'll probably skip in the interest of time. Okay. Uh, so why should we put standards, right, across the board? And basically, what I just said, you might have compliance requirement. And the other thing is, how do you monitor, alert, and forecast, right? A large enterprise. If you have hundreds of this PostgreSQL, how do you know that if something is going wrong? How do you know that a backup is not working or your long-term backup is not there? How do you know that your CPU is spiking? How do you know that there is a timeout, right? For all of these problems, right? If you are not going to sit there 24/7 to monitor all this, once you set up these standards, your operation becomes easier. Plus, you are also compliant from different regulatory requirements or your business requirements. So it solves both the problem, and that is why you should issue standards. And I wrote this uh, like a 4 bullet points here, but I'm not going to go into any further details. If you want to know more, just reach out to me. So the first one we're going to talk about is the workload type. Whenever you deploy a PostgreSQL, you can choose the workload type, either development and production. This does only one thing. It set up a default compute tier, which you can change before later on. So now the question you might ask me that if I can change it later on, why you are even setting up a standard? The problem is with the development, if you choose the default tier, compute tier it chooses is a burstable, and burstable doesn't have certain features that is really you need for a production deployment. Like it doesn't have geo redundant backup. You cannot have read replica in burstable. So I do not want in my company or at my workplace or for my clients to deploy a production uh, PostgreSQL with a burstable tier. Now you can change it later on, but some of the stuff that say like geo redundant backup, you can only set this up during deployment. So if I'm deploying with burstable later on, I want to change it, I cannot do that. That's why I want to have a policy from the top that any production deployment should be choosing production, and the default for that is a general, but you can also uh, change it to memory optimized. That is why I want to implement this one. And again, as I said, the my standard is development. For non-production and for production, you choose the production one. And if you can standardize this, I'm not going to say this again and again, I already mentioned this, then policy is the best. And this one actually, if you can enforce this during creation in your pipeline, that will be the ideal. But if you cannot, for any reason, policy should work. And this is my third slide that I talked about. I will skip this one for each of the remaining 14 items. Tags. So as you can see in the slide, I only have 2 tags that I put mandatory at my workplace. But for you, I'm not going to tell you how many you need. Yeah, you should, you should decide that for yourself. Uh, why tag? Why should we put tag? Tags can do a lot of stuff. You can group your resources by tag, by department, by business unit, production, non-production, UAT staging, uh, whatever way you need for reporting purposes and for billing. This is a huge, huge win, right? Because as your deployment or as your footprint is going to grow, very soon you will see that you have to take a control of your cost. And unless you plan this from the beginning, right, you push it to different departments or different business units, this will be very difficult. Many shops at the beginning, they think, okay, we'll centrally manage the cost. Uh, but as the journey begins, within a year or two, they realize, no, that's not going to work. Then they look at, the different way to, different subscriptions, uh, and different way to do this. But tax can help you big time. One thing I'll warn you, that the tax does not get inherited from the top to bottom. So do not think that I have this tax at a subscription. All my resource groups under that subscription, or all the resources under a resource group, is going to inherit those tax automatically. No, it does not. There is a way in the cost management as a line item, which is really not a tag, and I'm not going to go into details. That you can push through that if you want, but the tag itself doesn't get inherited. So just keep that in mind, because there's a lot of things get inherited. You can set that up from tenant to subscriptions to resource group to resources, but the tag is one item that you cannot. Maintenance schedule. So if you are working on premises or in Azure, right, things need to get patched. Whether it's software, hardware, we all know that. Even our phones get, right? How many times you get this iOS updates? How do you manage that? Normally, when we are in our own data center, right, life was easy. I could control this. I could probably do like non-prod this month, production next month, and all that. But now you cannot control that. But it's in the hand of your cloud provider. But for Postgres, Microsoft actually did some awesome work that you can somehow control it indirectly. So there is two maintenance schedule. One is called system managed, and one is a custom schedule. So for system managed means it's any day and any hour between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. But for custom schedule, I can choose a particular day of the week, and I can choose the hour. So I have a lot more control on that, right? It's a lot better than any day and between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. The other good part is any patch that Microsoft deploy, if it's a system managed, it get deployed today, but it will wait for 7 days to deploy to any servers that has been set up with custom schedule. So you really get 7 days of a break uh, for in between. So for me, my standard is, if you are a non-production, you get system managed. If you're production, you get custom schedule. That way, I get that 7 day buffer to do my test of the patch that was deployed, right? And I can see if there's any issue. And this one, I think you can easily do Azure policy if you follow my standard. One thing I'll tell you a little bit more is that you can get notification for these patches. So there are 5 different ways. I'm not going to go into details. I have the URL. You can go and see that there's a menu of 5 different items that you can get notified depending on how you want to get notified. Like you can even get a voice message. You can get if you're Azure Resource Manager role, you can get email, and you can get text messages and all this. The other thing is, normally between the 2 patches, there is a gap of 30 days, but do not count on that. If there is a critical or emergency update, you will get patched in between. You can get, before 30 days. So Microsoft is not going to honor it, right? If there is like a 0-day vulnerability, like as sometimes you see, like even on our phones, right? The Apple release those the 0-day vulnerability, and then Microsoft does it. You see it all over the news. So that time they're not going to wait for 30 days. But otherwise, if it's a normal patch process, you will pretty much you'll see a 30-day cadence between the patches. And there's some more resource for you to look at. Backup retention. This is something we all know. If you're working anything with the data, that you need to have your backups. Doesn't matter what kind of data you're working on or what system you're working on. And for this, when you deploy a PostgreSQL, by default you get 7 days point in time retention, which you can slide up to 35 days. So this 35 days, 7 to 35 or 0 to 35, you can even slide it back to 0 from 7. You get point in time that you can restore. But you can also get long-term retention. Like at my workplace, we have certain transactions in the financial industry that we must keep detailed record for up to 7 years. So for long-term retention, you can set that up and you can keep that for up to 10 years. Uh, in my place, we do not back up non-production. But again, as I said at the beginning, talk to your business owners, your business partners, your company policy. You might even need some retention for your non-production. It's up to you. Production, again, based on your requirement. How many days you want point in time? What's the long-term retention backup? And then if there is a company standard, you might still have some exceptions. Like, I'll give you an example. If there is a warehouse that is not generating any, it's not saving any new data, it's all, getting fetched from other systems from the company, do you need to take transaction log backups every X number of minutes? Do you need to keep point in time for 35 days because you can always reload? So that's the option. So you might have some exceptions. And this one, again, you can use either policy or function, what I said before, based on that. Backup redundancy. This is also important because if you have a issue, uh, how do you restore, right? So is your backup intact? Can you get it from where you have it? Is it corrupted? So there are three different ones. There's locally redundant, which is default if you are deploying in a region which doesn't have zone redundancy. And a zone, I'll just tell you in a quick sentence, a zone is something within a region you can have different data centers. A zone is independent of power, cooling, and all those. So even within a region, uh, if one data center is down, if you have zone redundancy, it will automatically come up in a different zone. So if you're deploying in a zone that has zone redundancy, that is the default. You can also set up your backup with geo redundancy, means it is going to get replicated, your backup, to hundreds of miles away. And Azure, if you go to the Learn website, you will see there is a partner kind of um, region, right? For just to give an example, for East US2, the partner is a Central US. So any backup you do in East US2, if you have geo redundancy, all the backups get copied to Central US. So what does that give you? If the whole region is down, you can use that backup that was copied in a different region and you can restore from there. For my standard, locally redundant for all non-production. Production, we have zone or geo redundant based on the application, and you can again policy or functions. One thing I think I mentioned before, I'll repeat it again because it's important to know. You can only choose geo redundancy at the time of creation. You cannot do that later on. So just be aware of that. Resource lock. This is not specific to PostgreSQL. This can be, this is applies to pretty much most of the resources in Azure. So there's two different locks. One is a delete lock and one is a read-only lock. And the name says it. The read-only is going to prevent you from any modification, and delete is going to prevent you from deleting the resource itself. So my standard is put the delete lock in production, and for non-production we use a the read-only lock. Sorry for yeah. The reason I do not want to put a delete lock on the non-production, because this can have issue with your deployment, right? If you are, if you're testing something, if you're continuously destroying and rebuilding through your pipeline, I do not want to have a delete log, because then your pipeline is going to fail, and it is just going to slow your development. But again, how do you do this in your place? Think about it, right? So again, as I said, mandatory for all production. Azure policy will work perfect for this. If you need an exception for any reason, make sure you document this. That way, that if something happens, why there was exception. who requested it, who approved it. Just document those. There's some more info about the logs. Compute tier. We touched it a little bit when we were talking about the workload type. So there are three compute tiers: burstable, memory optimized, and general purpose. For my standard at my workplace, as I said, for non-production, you can go to burstable because it's cheaper. It doesn't have all the bells and whistle, which you probably do not need for your non-production. But for production, we only use uh, the other two, general purpose and memory optimized. And if you need zone redundancy, you want to be careful before you deploy, because there is a list that I put in the resource that which region now allow zone redundancy. Not every region today have zone redundancy. Just be aware of that. And again, Azure policy. And then you also want to have, like, non-compliant servers if for some reason someone want to use burstable for production, because it's less cost. The application is not that, it's probably a different tier, a lower tier that they can afford. So just document that. Storage auto growth. So this one is very tricky, because if you set it up to auto, it's perfect. Everybody's happy. But then it can also cost you money, because if you get an alert that your storage is at 90%, you can always squeeze the developers or the app owners. Maybe they have some logging on, they have some historical data they can get rid of. But if you have auto scaling turned on, you're not going to catch those. So you have to decide what you want to do. um, uh, for me, again, we talk to the app owners, and we do it, case by case, because there can be situations that people cannot afford to have disk full, cannot have downtime. Some people, for them, if we give them alert at 90%, they're okay to work with us. Either we increase it manually, or they will find some data that we can purge, or put a purge routine. There's some more information about that. NS metrics. So you get a set of metrics that will come automatic when you deploy, but there are 6 different kind of enhanced metrics, and that also doesn't include, there's 2 more, like, called PG bouncer, and there is another one. You can set all this up for your production if you need. There are different server parameters that you have to turn on. There's one called PG bouncer. If you know about the auto vacuum, you can also monitor those. So you need to decide whether you need those or not. In my company standard, we turn some of those on for production. It's optional for non-production, but if someone is troubleshooting issue in non-production, we might turn it on for them. Diagnostic settings, you can see on the right side. For At my place, we turn it on for all production servers, because our destination is log analytics workspace. You can send it to storage account, you can send it to event hub, you can send it to some of the third-party monitoring tools nowadays. But one thing you remember uh, about the retention of your data. So control that, because that is going to dictate how much money you are spending. So the data is there for, I think it's 90 days, and I think up to first 31 days is free. But then after that, you have to pay for it. So, and you can adjust the retention based on your need. Server log. So this is different than the logs that you saw on the diagnostics picture. There are 2 logs. One is a server log, and one is called an upgrade log. By default, if you turn it on, it retains for 3 days. You can change it to between 1 and 7 days, and you can download those also. And during upgrade is very helpful. And for your day to day, if there's issue, you can go and take a look. So for my standard, it's turned on for production, uh, but we don't turn it on for non-production. High availability, very important. How you can achieve this? You can do it through, we talked about zone redundancy, we talked about geo-redundant backup. I'm not going to talk about those anymore. But you can also set up read replicas, and read replicas, you can always bring them up as a primary if the one region is down. So you can do that. But again, it is going to cost you, double. So if your app, depending on your RTO, RPO, if you're happy with your backup or zone redundancy, you don't need that. But if you need to bring that up quicker, but that you can set up, but your cost is going to go to, double. So just keep that in mind. Authentication mode, you can do both. You can do Entra only. You can do PostgreSQL authentication, or you can do mixed. Entra is the best if you can do it, because then you are not dealing with passwords, but sometimes it will not be possible. So talk to the business owners, and you can do it through Azure Policy. Very easy to implement. Private endpoint, super important. You do not want your data to go over public internet, so make sure you implement this. I mean, I would not I would not go without this. We do this for all servers. Doesn't matter if it's non-production or production, because we don't want data go over the public access, and we disable the public access. So, and Azure policy will be perfect to across the board to implement this one. Defender, it will cost you money. It costs $15 per server per month, but it can give you a lot of protection. It continuously check 24/7 brute force attacks, other abnormal traffic pattern. You can get alerted right away. We turn it on for all our servers, non-production and production, and Azure policy will be the best to implement this. So implementation approach, I mentioned a few times. I'm not going to go through it again. During deployment, function, and Azure policy, you can use all this. And here are some of my links. You can go to GitHub, my repo, and download. And other, you can contact me with any of these. And I thank you for attending my session. Reach out to me with any questions or comments. Thank you.